Joining me now to discuss more on Georgia's controversial new voting laws is Stephen Fowler. He's a political reporter at Georgia Public Broadcasting. Stephen, thanks for being here. So tell us more about the new restrictions. Who will be impacted the most?
Well, pretty much everyone will be impacted. It's a 98-page law that touches on every part of Georgia's voting administration, from absentee requirements to expanded poll worker access to when and how you can count the votes. The critics of this bill say that many of the provisions, such as adding absentee ID requirements, will disproportionately impact those in larger metro Atlanta counties, especially people of color. And really, all of this is going to change Georgia's voting landscape dramatically after the 2020 election.
And one of the things that people have been talking about a lot on a national scale is the part of the law that bans third-party groups from handing out food and water to voters waiting in line to cast their ballots. And we have seen at times Georgia lines become very long, particularly in lots of urban areas. So why was this included in the bill?
Well, what the bill language does is it prevents anyone from handing out food and water within 150 feet of a polling place, which is an area you're already not allowed to campaign. The Secretary of State's office and other Republican lawmakers say that voting rights groups or other third-party campaign groups have circumvented that no campaign zone by passing out food and water. They pointed to a recent state election board hearing where they found a Democratic candidate was campaigning within that spot by allegedly giving out food and water. But it's been met with a lot of criticism to say that, yes, there are long lines predominantly in the Atlanta area, predominantly where people of color vote, and giving food and water is definitely optically not something that seems like it should be criminalized.
Well, under the new legislation, the state election board is also given more power to intervene in local and county elections. What's not clear to me, Stephen, is under what conditions the state is allowed to intervene. Can you explain the significance to us?
Right. So currently, the state election board has 4 members, 2 appointed by the General Assembly, 1 each appointed by Republican and Democratic Party, and it's chaired by the Secretary of State. This law would make the legislature get to pick who the chair is and outline ways that local elections boards can be investigated and temporarily removed. Now, what the bill does spell out is that it would be for a number of reasons. They could request a performance review after several election cycles where a problem goes wrong, or the state election board could choose to investigate. But it's a pretty long, drawn-out process, so the likelihood of this being used to quickly take over an election board or to do anything to mess with how those local elections offices work is actually quite small.
That's good to know. I also want to talk to you, Stephen, about one of the criticisms that we heard following the last election when election officials faced backlash over the amount of time that it took to count the ballots for the 2020 election. Does this new law help in any way to speed up the ballot counting process?
Absolutely. There are, like I said, it's a 98-page bill, so there's a lot of things it does. But one thing is it allows county elections officials to begin processing absentee ballots 2 weeks before Election Day. The other thing, it requires them to count ballots nonstop as soon as the polls close and gives them a deadline of the day after the election by 5 p.m. to be finished. And there's another section of the bill that says as these ballots are being counted and results are being uploaded, counties have to give out the denominator of total ballots cast so people know how many more votes are left to count. Now, it'll add a lot more work for local elections officials and poll workers, but it should, to some degree, help people know much quicker who is going to win these races.
So it sounds like there are some positive developments in this bill. Nonetheless, there are many parts of it that are concerning to voting rights advocates. And President Biden himself said that he would, quote, take this case to the American people to fight this law. Talk to us about some of the more controversial aspects of the bill and what options the Biden administration has to try and reverse parts of the bill that seek to hamper voter access.
Since the Shelby versus Holder Supreme Court decision, Georgia no longer had to get voting law changes pre-approved or pre-cleared by the Justice Department, but there are several options. There's been a lawsuit filed really hours after the bill was signed that said many of the provisions, the controversial provisions, would disproportionately impact voters and violate some existing federal laws that are still into place. There has been pushback over the absentee ID requirement that says you must use a driver's license number, a state ID number, or a photocopy of voter ID to request and vote your absentee ballot. There are also concerns over Georgia's runoff period. Previously, it was 9 weeks. Now it's been shortened to 4 weeks. And that says, some of these voting rights groups say that's not enough time to have a full slate of early voting or to get absentee ballots turned around. So there are mechanisms in the courts that both the federal government and these voting rights groups are seeking to take to try to see if this 98-page law can be knocked down a couple pegs, so to speak.
Well, Republicans in dozens of other states are looking to pass similar restrictions. What are they learning from the Georgia law?
Well, the Republican sponsors of the bill in Georgia have cast this as about election integrity and about taking processes that were used and used widespread in the 2020 election and providing more guardrails on them. The 2020 election cycle was unprecedented in a lot of ways because of the coronavirus pandemic, and many states adapted and adopted rules and regulations to help people vote in a public health emergency. So now what Georgia's bill is being cast as a way to add in some of those things that were done during the pandemic full time, but provide more parameters so that people, aka Republican voters, have more confidence that that system is not being abused, even though there is no evidence that that took place in Georgia or elsewhere.
All right, Stephen Fowler, thank you.
Thank you.